Hey guys, Millicil here, and today I'd like to show some help and support to those Battlegrounds players out there who are struggling to really optimize and run Battlegrounds as smoothly as they can on their PCs, on their machines. And the biggest thing I'd like to note here is that the game is in early access and developers are working on optimizing the game, so there's not a whole lot that we can do on our end. We're really just waiting for them to fix their game as best as they can, but there are some things that you definitely can do to improve your FPS in the game, help the game run smoother, be less buggy, less glitchy, and just improve your overall experience playing the game. So going right into the games and the settings itself, there's of course multiple settings in the graphics tab. Now the most important thing to understand is that you should run your games in full screen mode. Now I know a lot of games like to be run in full screen windowed mode. Some people like, or it's also known as borderless in other places, or windowed. Now, if you're running at a lower resolution, windowed can be okay, so that you're not stretching the picture out too far. But the majority of games that are developed for the PC are designed to be played in full screen mode, and they are going to run their smoothest and their best on full screen. As far as the resolution goes, I've got a 1080 monitor. I play all my games in 1080p, and that's just one thing I like to stay to is 1080. If you are really struggling, you can drop this resolution down to like 720p. 1600 by 900 I've heard is very efficient. I've actually run it myself and it does work well, but a resolution change is kind of a last-ditch effort in case you really are struggling, can't even play the game. Now going on to brightness, that's a personal preference thing, doesn't change the performance in any way. And screen scale, what the screen scale does for this game is it scales the resolution of the game so that by dropping this down to 70, 80, you should be able to get an increase in performance, where sacrificing the visual display, the looks of the game. But I've tried 80, 90, 70, and while there is a slight, and I mean very minuscule, improvement in performance, it hasn't been working out for me. I'm running an i7 with a GTX 970, so on my end I haven't seen much with this. I'm just leaving it at 100 screen scale. Next is anti-aliasing. In anti-aliasing, with you don't know much about it, it's kind of when you see edges in a video game, they can look really pixelated if they get on low settings, whereas they can be very smooth, very clear edges. So I've been running the game on very low, medium anti-aliasing, and there's definitely a difference visually. But I've also noticed that if you do go to the medium, high, or even ultra settings for anti-aliasing to make the game look as nice as you can for the edges and things of that nature, it does hinder your performance. So I've been staying around low, sometimes very low. When you do this, you can kind of see, like on this pillar, there's kind of jagged edges. On the AK, there's these almost like white dots because it's not perfectly connecting the pipe along the way. So things of that nature, it's not going to look as nice. The game's gonna not be as pretty, but you will notice a performance increase if you do lower the anti-aliasing settings down. So moving on, post-processing and shadows are two things that I've tweaked each of, and post-processing, there's not a whole lot to it, but just put it on very low. There's no need for you to be making your computer suffer as far as this goes. Now, shadows has a huge background to it, so many have argued that, you know, by having your shadows increased, you can understand where buildings and trees and things of that nature are making shadows and making the visibility worse, in which you can hide and use it as cover. And while this argument does hold true, there's also the downside that your opponents will be hiding in shadows and you won't be able to see them because of the shadows that are covering them. I've not only noticed a FPS gain by putting shadows on very low, but also a performance in-game playing by lowering the shadows. By making the shadows not process well, you're actually able to see into the shadows in the dark, in which you wouldn't have typically been able to see. So people hiding behind a building or a tree, you can see more clearly because the shadows are on very low. So my suggestion, definitely put this on very low. It doesn't matter if you're running the whole game on ultra settings and looking fantastic, put this on very low and it'll actually help you in the game. Textures are just, you know, exactly what they say. It's how an object looks, you know, the shape to it. I've been messing around with textures for a while, and to be completely honest, it hasn't made, between very low, low, and medium, it doesn't make too big of an FPS change. Once you do jump up to that, you know, ultra setting, it does bog you down a bit. But I like to keep it on medium just so that I can, you know, see the textures of the building, see, you know, bricks, rocks, different things of that nature. It's just, you know, a preference thing. It's not too big of a deal. So if you want to put this on very low, go for it, you know, tweak it. I keep mine on medium. It's a me thing. And then effects and foliage. So effects, as far as I've noticed, have not made any difference, no matter, you know, what kind of settings you've changed them to. The effects of grenades are a little bit noticeable, a few things like that nature, but to be quite honest, I don't care that much what a grenade looks like going off. I'm much more concerned with hearing the grenade, knowing where it blows up, and even on very low you can see it, hear it, and move on tactically from there. And foliage is similar to shadows in that when you do turn foliage down to very low, I want to say a vast majority of the grass and small brushes get taken out of the game completely. You are playing with patches of grass here and there and just dirt, rocks on the ground. So it is a bit strange switching from, you know, the setting on high to low. You'll definitely notice it in the game. You'll be a bit confused as to where the hell did all that grass go, but setting it on low, one, increases your FPS by a large margin. Having all that foliage around means a lot more details for the GPU to be pumping out and showing you visually, but having it on very low also lowers the amount of hiding space and grass that an opponent can be crawling through. So tactically, putting this on very low is advantageous as well. For you, laying down in grass versus in dirt, you might not be sure where you're in cover, where you're not. But if your opponent is looking at you and, you know, you're laying down on dirt and you're worried, oh shit, I'm not in cover, but on his end he's running this on medium, high, ultra, and you're completely covered by foliage, then, you know, you might not even know it, but you've got cover against the guy, you know, and he can't have line of sight on you. So again, I feel like this with shadows is a tactical advantage to leave on very low regardless of how well you're running the game. And view distance is something that I have been tinkering around with a lot. This is probably the most substantial FPS eater, to put it that way. I would never recommend you put it on very low, because you do need to see much farther than very low on your game. However, low might be the perfect amount for increasing your FPS while still having plenty of viewing distance. Once you go into the medium high ultra range, you're talking about seeing a bridge miles down the road that you, even with an 8 times scope, 15 times scope, probably couldn't line up a shot on. So practically, I would say low is probably your go-to setting here. And then motion blur is a personal preference thing. To me, I get nauseous seeing motion blur in my games, whether that's Battlefield or PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. I always turn it off. I absolutely hate it. I can't stand motion blur. I think it was ridiculous. I mean, the idea is pretty good, but in execution, it's god awful. So that's another me thing. If you like motion blur, leave it on. Of course, won't change your FPS. So that's all of the in-game settings. Now moving on to things you can do outside of the game to help your FPS. So the first recommendation I will make for people trying to increase their FPS in PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds is go and update your graphics card driver. They are constantly pushing, both ATI and NVIDIA are constantly pushing their drivers to optimize their cards for the newest games that are coming out. They're trying their best to push every ounce of power out of your system for your game so that you can enjoy it as best as you can. For me, I have an NVIDIA GTX 970, so you go through 900 series, 970, Windows 10 64-bit, English language, search, comes up with the newest driver version for me, download it, install it, run it through. I do recommend when you do install GeForce drivers, there's an option under custom installation to perform a clean install. What this does is it completely wipes your prior driver before installing the new one. That being said, since your display driver gets wiped out, your screen will go black momentarily before the new one is installed. So if your screen flickers black once, twice, 10-15 seconds off and then comes back on, just don't freak out. Let it do its thing. If at any point in time, the installation is to fail, you can take your HDMI cord or DVI cord out of the graphics card, plug it into the motherboard, have your computer run off of the Intel integrated graphics or AMD's CPU's integrated graphics, and install the driver again that way. Once the driver is properly installed, obviously plug your display back into your graphics card. I mean, I've yet to have a driver installation fail mid installation doing a clean install, and I've done it for years, so hopefully you guys won't have any problems either, but just a thing to note. The next thing I'll recommend is to go into your Steam library, find your game, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, open up Properties, and set launch options. So under the General tab, press the Set Launch Options button, and this little window will come up. So it'll tell you these options are for advanced users only, and that's very true. You can, do some stupid things in here, but as long as you're being careful, you're completely all set. Now I will recommend you punch this code in as I have it. So it is dash in caps use all available cores, and what this does is exactly what it sounds like. It uses all the available cores that you have on your CPU so that you're not playing the game off of 2 cores if you've got a 4-core CPU. It's kind of foolish to be paying so much money for a i5, i7, AMD processor that's an absolute kick-ass beast, however many cores you've got in it, and then just not use them all when you're struggling to run the game. So again, dash use all available cores. Next is space dash malloc equals system. And what this actually is a memory allocation trick for the game to allocate the memory that it needs through the system settings. The game might not be performing as well as it could be because of its way of allocating memory space. So use this as a little trick. Works on other games. I've used it multiple times for just helping the game out, increasing your FPS a little bit. And the last bit of this is dash SM4. What SM4 does is it has the GPU use DX10 shader rather than DX11, and some people have complained that in the game it's a little bit darker. I haven't noticed much of a difference, to be honest. If you want to use this, you can. You don't need to, but the goal of using DX10 rather than 11 is to lower the amount of GPU calculations necessary for the shading of the game. So I've got that in my launch settings. You just hit OK, and the next time you start up the game, it will run with these launch options right out of Steam. So thank you guys so much for watching my FPS and optimization guide for PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. I do hope this helps you guys get some FPS boost and are able to enjoy this awesome and fun game, get some kills, and hopefully get that chicken dinner. Peace.